I'm Chair Holt, and is Vice Chair Paul Gator in attendance?
Present.
And Committee Member Hal Bogner?
Present.
Committee Member Steve Maller?
Sorry, present.
Committee Member Claudia Marshall?
Present.
Committee Member Phil Marshall?
Present.
And Committee Member Michael Settles?
Present.
All right, thanks everyone for being here tonight. So we have Shalise and Ken here with us tonight from NDC, and they're going to be showing us the maps that we've come up with, and we're going to be looking through them, and I'll hand it over to them.
Okay, Ken's going to start off, and then I'm going to, after Ken, I'll get into the draft map phase of it. So let me go ahead and share my screen, and I'll turn it over to Ken.
And Chair Holt, that's one of the reasons I asked about the public is the first 5 slides I'm gonna go through is a repeat potentially for you, but I try and repeat the framework of the mapping just because in case there are members of the public that haven't seen it and are just coming into the conversation, it's important to recognize. So we can go to the next slide, and what I want to do is frame the discussion. The first thing is y'all have done a lot of work already, and you can see the workshops up front. The public hearings are required by law. Different jurisdictions do different workshops and different iterations of public outreach in many different ways, but the public hearings are required when you're doing this effort. We're now at December 16th, where we're going to look at revised maps from the last time we had some feedback from you. The whole key to this is to try, it doesn't always work, but to try to funnel the amount of maps so that when you get to City Council, you're giving them a couple, 3 maps with different variations so that they can have a decision that's based on your work. It doesn't always work. Sometimes you have a bunch of maps, but we're encouraging to try and funnel as best you can. And you can see you are pegging March 15th as your adoption date. The deadline is actually April 17th, so you're building in about a month in case there's some issues or challenges that you give yourself some time or gives the city some time. Next slide, please. This is the most critical of the slides, and it's important to remind everybody that you can't just draw lines wherever you want. The whole point of this effort is every 10 years, there's a recounting of the people and across the United States, and every jurisdiction has to look at the amount of people, look at the amount of districts they have, and in your case, you're looking at 4 or 5, divide by that amount, and that gives you your target amount for each district. It's often called the 1 person, 1 vote principle, but you want to try and get things within a certain percentage as close to the same numbers within each district. Otherwise, the theory is somebody has more representation than others. And so that's what you'll hear us refer to it as population balance. You want to be within a 10% swing between the highest and the lowest populated of districts. The other part is the Federal Voting Rights Act. And this is a subtle but important critical rule. You cannot draw maps that dilute the potential for a protected class, and those are defined in the law as ethnic linguistic groups. You can't draw maps that dilute their potential for electing. And it's important to say it that way. You can't either take a certain amount of people and put them all into one area when in fact they could potentially have 2 based on the numbers, or you can't take a significant population, split it in half, and then dilute their potential for electing. There's no percentage and number that's put on it, but that's a potential for election. The flip side of that is the last part, no racial gerrymandering. You equally can't significantly draw a district that goes and looks like it is trying to capture people of a protected class to make an ethnic or protected class seat. That word gerrymandering, by the way, is often used politically to gerrymander for Democrat or Republican. And it actually, just as a historical note, comes from as a former governor of Massachusetts named Jerry, who approved a district that was in the shape of a salamander. So they called that effort gerrymandering. And that's one of those things, you'll know it when you'll see it, and the courts know it when they see it. Those are federal laws. The second part is the California Fair Maps Act, which was recently passed. These are in order of priority how you have to think about drawing your maps. And the key phrase here is as much as practicable. The court and the law recognizes you can't do these perfectly because they work in and around each other, especially with the federal law. But the first is contiguous. You want districts that are connected. That makes sense to most people. The second is you try not to divide either traditionally defined neighborhoods or what you'd call communities of interest. Those communities of interest can be physical, they can be economic, they can be, you could have a senior community of interest, which I know in Half Moon Bay you do have that issue. You can define that how you want. The key is for the jurisdiction to define it in a way that is defensible by law. If you have a map that has some kind of configuration and you said we drew it because this was the community of interest, you need to define that and defend it. But that's a significant part of the law. Third is identifiable boundaries, either person-made or natural. You have an ocean on one side, but you also have two freeways that intersect. You can use parks, you can use shopping centers, but if a district is designed, what is it, Frenchman's Creek at the top, right? If you believe that those barriers are critical to communities of interest, you can call them out and say, that's how we defined this district. And then the last is compactness, which is a harder one for a district like yours, particularly because you do have an ocean on the west side. But you try and find districts that are compact visually so that the court doesn't look like you're jumping over one group of people to get to another. The last thing in red there is important is you're not allowed to favor one political party over another or be seen as drawing maps in that regard. On the right, the last part is these are traditional ones, principles that are used. You can use them or not. It's just sort of there so you know that it's been used, and if the logic is there, you can do it. You try and not make it so that people who were elected for a certain period of time, if you draw a map and that puts them in a shorter term, that doesn't seem to be right based on what people voted on. So that's the voters' choices and their continuity in office. You are allowed, if you had a place where people were, a certain amount of permits were issued and you know there's going to be a growth in areas, you can sort of underpopulate that district, knowing full well that it's going to grow. It's a little bit trickier, but you're allowed to do it as long as you call it out. And again, preserving core of existing districts, it's a little trickier because people often can see that as protecting incumbents. But you're allowed to say, hey, people are used to it, they're comfortable with it, and they've elected certain people. Again, most of this is as long as you call it out in accord with the state and the federal laws. Let me just stop and see, is there anything that was surprising since the last time we talked? Any questions or comments about that? Okay, so we took all of that. We took the feedback from what you gave us last time, and a lot of the maps that Shalise is going to talk about are going to be couched in terms of population balance and or communities of interest to see if we got what you were talking about in feedback, which is the great part of having a commission. You are filtering that feedback. I'll take the next slide, please. These are your current districts, as you well know them. These are the 4 districts that you have. And again, what I was talking about before, that District 3, someone might look at it and say, how is that not compact or whatever? But you know the unique quality of Half Moon Bay, and you know how that's drawn. And that has to be, it was defensible the last time you drew it, and you have to explain how that works. The other thing is you have population centers in the middle, and you have things that are less populated that are not. So you have this dynamic where you have to have big land areas, but you have to go get people in order to what we would call population balance. So this is what it looks like now. And the final slide that I'm going to talk to is the next one, which is the population balance. Since the last time you drew it, you can see the percentage out of balance that you're at. District 4 has significantly more people than District 3, and that is a 16-point spread. The target you're after is less than 10% on that spread. We would encourage trying to get as close to 0 as possible, but the court would say less than 10, you're presumed to be legal. That's the presumption going in. Someone could disprove it, but the idea is you go in less than 10% legal. That last box there, and by the way, this is just for 4 districts. So your target population for 4 is 29,053, and your target district for 5 is 2,363. It changes based on how many districts you want. That last box simply says it's not as easy as it looks, but technically, mathematically, if you could change about 200 people out of 4 to drop them down and move them into 2 and 3, which are the lowest, you could kind of get to population balance. If any of you have tried to draw the maps, you'll know that there's this ripple effect. You can do that simply, but the minute you do one, it moves others and you move others, and then there's this sort of what we call a ripple effect. It's harder than it looks, but mathematically, that's what you'd have to do. So I'll stop. Are any questions or comments about the framework? And again, I appreciate you letting me go through that, because members of the public, if they're here and joining now for the first time, they need to know that that's the context in which the maps are being drawn.
There is one thing which, we've touched on before, and I think it's important to bring to the attention of the public, which is that the balance of language groups and minorities and things like that, as distributed through the city, are such that those federal concerns of packing or cracking are impossible to occur in our city. So while there are things you have to be careful about, they're not things that we have to worry about here, because the population is pretty much heterogeneously distributed.
It's a good point, Commissioner. It seems that way in your jurisdiction, absolutely. And I know Shalise has a slide to get into that to sort of explain it, but that's you nailed it right on the head.
Thank you.
Just had a quick point of clarification for Jessica. I didn't see that we have public comment on the agenda tonight, but I do see that we probably have 6 members of the public with us tonight. Is there going to be time for that, or is that for the consecutive meetings after this, once we've actually had a chance to look through what we're going to see tonight?
We don't have a specific public comment section. We have public comment on the item that's on the agenda. And so, as in previous meetings, it's kind of up to you at what point you want to take public comment. My suggestion would be after we go through the PowerPoint and before the committee deliberates.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All set?
All right.
Shalise?
Let's get to the fun stuff, huh? Just as Ken said, it's not quite as simple as just moving a couple hundred people, but we tried to do that with draft A and draft B. And at NDC, typically when we are trying to take the existing map and be the least disruptive to the community, we call it draft A and draft B, and then you'll see the others are numbered consecutively. But that kind of gives us a clue that was our goal, is to be the least disruptive to the voters, while still achieving what we believe still accomplishes both the federal and the state laws. In 2020, they kind of threw us for a loop, and the federal census decided to combine census blocks together. So they would take 2 different census blocks and make them into one larger block. And they did that to us, which on one of the boundaries of the existing District 3, they combined 2 blocks. So even if we wanted to, and if we were able to, which we're not, to adopt the map as it is, we'd still have to have some slight modification Because one thing we don't mention in our previous slides is we have the restriction of following the geography of the census blocks. And some of those census blocks have really funny and large skewed borders, but we have to follow the geography that's given to us. So point this out just to let you know that there was a merging of some blocks just north of Central Avenue. And to achieve population balance, Draft A took those two blocks and put them in District 3, and then balanced it out by moving the census block that's bordered by Kelly Avenue and Highway 1 and Correas, and move it from District 4 to District 2. You saw this at the last presentation as well, so this is not new to you.
Steve, it looks like Steve has a question.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm curious about this particular map. So those of you who live in the neighborhood, I live right at the corner of Poplar and Railroad Avenue. So we're on a border. And I understand how this was kind of cut up because of population realities and so on. But there are a number of things about this map that are curious. For example, as you see in District 4, Myrtle Street, which is just north of Poplar Street, extends off to the beach. But Myrtle Street doesn't actually exist in real life. And there are a number of other blocks in this map which don't actually exist in real life. So I'm wondering why those were included in the map, because it's a little misleading. And I wonder whether this had been gone over by the city, or what data was used to create this grid, because it's a little misleading. I don't know that there's anybody that actually lives. This is basically open space out there.
Mm-hmm. The geography is provided by the Census Bureau. Some jurisdictions, some cities go through the process of cleaning up those abnormalities that you pointed out. And actually the census did recognize that those are not streets. They put them all in one census block. So it's just a little bit, it is odd.
I think there's some streets that are just on the maps because they were at some point up for development, and so they remain. But we know that there's no population on that street, and so it wouldn't change anything in terms of the intent of our mapping.
Yeah, that's.
I think the issue that I have basically is that I have, as I'm in the little block that's labeled 45, although actually we're on the other side of the street, so we actually don't even have a number. So I'm wondering whether or not, and there's a few people who are on our street who are in the same situation. So I wonder about whether these maps were vetted, who vets these maps at the level of, individual homes, and whether or not there are actually people in these things. Because according to this map, we live in open space and we don't have a block.
You do have a census block. It's at my recollection, and I can show you how we can view it in the interactive review map. It's one very large census block that does take in many people.
Yeah, I noticed that when playing around with the maps, if you try to highlight where you live, Steve, that whole section lights up all along the coast there. So I think it's grouping numbers, probably population numbers.
It's
I think it's just us and the voles, actually, the field mice and the raptors, and there aren't really any humans that live out there according to this map. So
yeah,
anyway,
there's population in that segment because it's grouped with several others, and in my mapping software, it shows. We'll hop over to the interactive review map. We can show a satellite image that shows the underlying homes that are there and population counts. Mhm. But you're right, that's a frustration. The census block doesn't, the census doesn't do a very good job at dealing with cul-de-sacs either. So that people on the outside of the cul-de-sac will be in a very large census block and not grouped with the rest of the neighborhood. So you have a similar situation.
So Lisa, if I could just, Commissioner Muller, that's precisely what this is all about. If there are areas, last time we did sort of the rough cut and we got to railroad, and we got to the if there are areas where you think that you could clean up and you direct us to clean it up in a map that you don't think might have population impact, but would make more sense, you could direct that and or adjust it and say, see if we could draw a map that would do something that would make more sense locally. And then we'd have to figure out how to population balance it if necessary. That's the whole point. If your logic makes sense, then we could adjust that. I'm hoping Shalise is nodding, but that I've seen that in sort of rural districts. It's the same thing. You have this wide open expanses, and it's the borders where the issues are.
Yeah, this one I think they've done they've done a combination of some residents and some open space areas, so that would be more difficult.
Yeah, so you'd have to take a look at it and see where the numbers are. That's all.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Oops, sorry. I think I got ahead of myself. Draft B is similar in that we tried to be the least disruptive to the existing districts. I'm going to try to close my, and we actually picked up, District 2 picks up 7 city blocks around Kelly and Maine for some population balance. Those, the merged blocks that we're talking about, Draft B puts all of it in District 3, along with 3 city blocks south of Correas. As we go through the maps, I will point out those that are not population balanced and those are not contiguous. All of the other ones that we're showing you are population balanced and contiguous. District 5, because we have an existing 4-district map, District 5 is completely a new map that you've seen, and we'll see it in the rest of the, I actually have it listed with the others, so it's not called out separately, but this is just, I wanted to leave this slide in here just so that you, it was familiar to you and was not, you realize it wasn't a change from the last time you already saw both alternative 501 and alternative 502. Both alternatives 501 and 502, Highway 1, north of this detail that you're seeing, is the border between districts 1 and 2 in the north and between districts 3 and 4 in the south. Before we get into actually looking at all of the maps in general, that was a review of everything you've already seen. Now we're going to be seeing new things. The city as a whole is 16% Latino when we're looking at the citizen voting age voting age population category. As you recall from our previous discussions, that's the category that folks will look at when they're looking to see if there was a Federal Voting Rights Act violation, or those who are looking to increase the voting strength of a certain protected class will look at that classification. Those are residents, U.S. citizens who are 18 years of age and eligible to vote. The city as a whole is only 16%, which is very small, and we have in all of these maps we're not near getting a majority. It's near it. The highest we were able to get in a 5-district map was 28%. So we're not even close to 50%. The next thing we often look at is if we see if a combination of all of our protected classes could make a majority, and that's called a majority minority district. And that's not possible as well. The way that we identify that is we look at the percentages of our white citizen voting age population to see if any of the districts were able to have a less than 50% white citizen voting age population. And we were not able to accomplish that. We had 63%, I believe, was our lowest citizen voting age population in a 5-district map. These particular statistics here are useful for this commission because in the end, the council will ask for your recommendation on a 4-district map or a 5-district map. One of the reasons why some jurisdictions consider a 4-district map or a 5-district map is because, and it's not always one way or the other, but sometimes 4 districts will be more beneficial to try to achieve a higher percentage of Latino citizen voting age population, and sometimes a 5-district map would achieve that. We don't see a whole lot of difference between the 4-district maps and the 5-district maps. We see a slightly higher in the 5-district maps, meaning we're able to get a single district that has a higher percentage of Latino citizen voting age population. The highest we were able to accomplish is 28%, which again is not even anywhere near a 50% majority. And as Ken mentioned, the total population for 4 districts is 2,954, and for 4 districts, it's 2,363. One thing I want to point out is the city did make the decision to go to a directly elected mayor. That election cycle has not happened yet. So all 5 of the council members now are council members that are elected as council members. And we do not have a directly elected mayor yet. That would happen in 2022 unless the city ultimately decides to go to a 5-district map. So that's important to point out that with each of the 4-district maps, because we have 5 seated council members, there will be 2 council members that are drawn into the same district. So we call that a pairing. So just know that each of the 4-district maps that we'll be showing you have at least 1 pairing. In fact, there's only one of the maps that has 2 pairings.
Shalise, can we pause for just a second? It looks like Phil has a question or a comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to explore this a bit because it'd be good to understand how much weight you think we should put on these differences then between 28% here and 21% is the biggest difference between the various maps we're looking at. I mean, in an earlier meeting in the summer, I remember you saying that we should be wary of maps that had a very even distribution of Hispanic population. So, if they all came out to be 16, that would be a red flag. But, I think at some level it will matter, right? The difference between 28 and 21 could matter in an election. That if you're in a district that has 28% of your community, you do have greater voting power, right?
Yeah, and that also depends on if we have polarized voting. So there are so many factors that come into play. And yes, you're right. We would typically look for the concentrated, if we have concentrated, if any of our non-white citizen voting age population is concentrated in any one area. And actually, we're not finding that. So in this case, now that we've gone through this process, a somewhat evenly disbursement of our protected class group is not necessarily indicative that we've diluted any of the voting strength of our protected class. And it's pointing us to see that we do have a fairly evenly dispersed area, although we are getting some higher areas. And you're right, 28% does have an advantage over 21%. We'd have to get into a very detailed racially polarized voting analysis to determine if that makes a difference. I'm not remembering, but I believe that Half Moon Bay has very few voting precincts. And so in order to do a proper analysis, you would have to have different voting precincts to be able to compare to one another. So it's difficult to determine.
Mhm. Okay, so I think it sounds like we should just try and weigh this sensibly alongside other factors, like, you know, keeping other communities.
Exactly, looking at communities of interest, like as Ken pointed out. I mean, you have the senior community. You do have you do have communities that have different socioeconomic ranges. Those that are dealing with different issues. Different types of housing, those type of things that have been mentioned in previous meetings should be the focus. We point out this slide to just let you know that it looks like we don't have one single concentrated area of any single protected class, and the numbers have proven that.
So just a final comment. This is the citizen voting age population. Do you happen to have the numbers to hand for the total population? I mean, when it comes to, you know, pressure felt by representatives in order to make change happen on the council, I could imagine that total population is something that they would feel when making decisions about representing their constituents. So I think it's closer to what, 30-40% across the city. Is that right?
Yes, we're working on getting you the demographic summaries for each of the maps that will show the total. Right now, we just have the brief summaries. Yeah. So I was hoping, I was checking to see if they were able to get it for you by this afternoon. That's the one thing I can't do from my end, especially when we have a combination of a 4-district and a 5-district maps. So yeah, if we don't have the full demographic summaries that would show the overall.
That might be a good.
We do have them for draft A, FB, and 501 and 502.
I think it might be helpful to communicate that along with the rest of the information about the maps that come out of this meeting today, just because I think it's good for everyone to know just how high a fraction of the population is Latino and how much weight we should be giving them.
Thanks, Phil. I agree with you.
I can bring up one of those that would show the total overall.
It looks like Paul and Hal both have comments as well.
Yeah, thanks. I think Phil's making a good point, but I think it's also highlighting the challenge that we have in making changes to the maps, and small changes make kind of quite big changes in terms of the number of people. I mean, if you think that the difference between 21% and 28% is 7%, which in the districts is going to be 200 people, maybe 250, depending on whether it's a 4-district or a 5-district. And I'm sure you know from playing around with the mapping tool, it's really quite hard to actually get the districts right, and while also trying to keep an eye on what you're doing with the percentage of the Latino population. So I feel for me, that's not a big enough number that I feel we need to worry about too much. I'd be more concerned if it was a difference between 21% and 40%. That would be more concerning to me. But I did find as I was going through this exercise, it's really challenging because small changes can make a big difference to percentages when we're looking at small numbers.
You're absolutely right. Absolutely right on all accounts with your statement. Yeah, we're not concerned because these ranges are pretty tight. And also we're not concerned because we're not bumping up to the 50%. So it is a strong indicator that our protected class groups are pretty evenly dispersed, with the exception of some minor areas, obviously. But when you're talking with such a small jurisdiction of, less than 12,000, just a couple hundred can put you out of balance. And when you have the further restriction of following the census block geography, it is a challenge. As some of you who drew maps and did an excellent job at it learned. Any other questions on this slide before we move on?
I think Hal has a comment.
You know, we're kind of, you know, getting prepared to dive into, you know, a lot of the details of the map drawing. And, you know, this slide and some of the things discussed here, you know, I think are a moment when we might consider talking about, you know, some of the high level questions, such as the at-large mayor and 4-district versus 5-district. And, you know, there also, you know, is an issue of, well, we didn't see the actual comments from the city survey, which I was hoping to be able to thumb through personally. And I don't know if other members of the committee were as well. There were a large number of people apparently expressed a wish to return to, you know, all of the council members being at large and elected citywide. And I would be interested in whether we might inquire of the council as to, you know, offering them any thoughts in these areas, because I've spoken to a fair number of citizens who'd like to see that discussed again, and to one council member who told me that it would be desired by the council, in that member's opinion, to hear, you know, opinions and thoughts, you know, beyond just the map drawing from this group. I don't know if, you know, we should inquire of the council whether they'd actually like to get any discussion from this group about it. I know it's been discouraged here because it's off the path of getting the maps drawn. And I appreciate that, because this is a lot of work. And, you know, both Jessica and Shalise and Mark and others have been putting a lot of time into that, as have, you know, several members of the commission here have put a lot of time into it in the drawing of these maps. I've also, you know, learned that, you know, the agreement that the city made, you know, when it was kind of pressed at the last minute with the threat of a lawsuit, doesn't apparently bind it to remaining so. And that the city of Santa Monica has successfully, with demographic distribution that showed that they couldn't form districts that produced the kind of results that brought the threat to the city, successfully defended its position of, you know, continuing to elect all the council members at large. And I listened to, you know, Phil discuss how groups, you know, within districts might, you know, be, you know, able to be better represented against the interests of people in other districts. And, you know, I just see this march toward divisiveness in what is a small, cohesive community that I've lived in for almost 3 decades. So I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that there are high-level policy issues for the city, as well as, you know, the detailed work that we have to produce for the city council to be able to choose amongst maps. So thank you for letting me express that.
Yeah, and City of Santa Monica is not through with their court battle, so there's still.
Right, there's a Supreme Court appeal.
Yes. Okay,
but
we saw that.
I think even from the presentation that you, Shalise, made to the council the first time around, I think it was impossible for the you know, the firm that brought this action to the city, or threat of action, to have actually produced an example of how the result that they sought, you know, could be produced. And certainly the Latino member of the council today was not elected in a district by a majority of minority members voting. It was elected by, you know, the same distribution that we see on this this slide. And presumably, therefore, on merit.
Okay, any other questions on this part?
I think we're good to keep going. Thank you.
Okay. Showing you the current amount of maps again, in case you would want to go back to it. What you're seeing on the screen here is, I know that you cannot see all the detail, and we have each of the detail on the upcoming slides. But this map, this particular slide will be useful for you in wanting to remember and jump back to what map did what, but also in perhaps the commission deciding overall themes of what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. You see that there are definitely some themes that have emerged. These are the 4 district maps. We had nine that were submitted. 3 were not population balanced. So when you see, for example, we can't count the current. So there are 8, and 2 were not population balanced. When you see 403 that's not population balanced, and you see 403B, 403B was drawn by NDC to balance, to try to preserve as much as possible what the map submitted with 403. We don't know the actual intent, but to keep intact 403 as much as possible, yet make it population balanced so that the commission could consider it. So that's what you see the difference between 403 and 403B, same with 404 and 403B. And I can show you those exact areas where those changes were made, if you desire. I do want to point out some themes, however. There's definitely some different ways of treating the north part of the city. We see many that are using Highway 1 as the dividing marker for the north end between districts 1 and 2. And then we see in map 404 that's actually has taken everything north of Frenchman Creek and put it in the north area, and then followed Highway 101 all the way down to Cali. So that's just something to keep in mind, and you can make a note if that's something that, if one of those features you think seems to make sense or doesn't seem to make sense, that's often a good way to say, yes, we want to consider maps that have this feature, or no, we don't want to consider maps that have this other feature. Another feature, and you'll see in the current districts, is that little sliver that is east of Highway 101. That road is Miramontes Point, or Miramontes Point Street. I know you have 2 Miramontes in the city. One's in the north and one's down here. So I'm not sure the terminology that is used for that sliver that is east of Highway 101, but if it's not offensive, can we call it the east sliver? The southeast sliver, just so that or does someone have a better term? Does that make sense to you or not? I know when the current maps were adopted, it was, and then it's not highly populated in that area, but there are some residents that live in those areas, and that share commonalities with living right next to Highway 101. And very different culture than what you see from the east side of Highway 1 to the west side of Highway 101. So it does make sense, and it did make sense for the current map to adopt that sliver and put it up with more of the Arleta Park area and the central area of the city. So that's one other feature that I wanted to point out that differs. Some take the sliver and stop right at Miramontes Point Street. And then some map 402 takes in, it's Canada Cove. So those are just other features to contemplate. Other features that we talked about at the last meeting was trying to keep Arleta Park as much intact as possible. So I did want to point out that was kind of a goal that was requested by the commission. Ken and I both opened up the mapping software to see how we could do it. And I can point out actually in map 503 how it's difficult to do. you can see that there are some maps that do a better job at it than others, and some took the approach of splitting it up into more than one representation. As Jessica pointed out at your last meeting, sometimes that is desirable to have more than one representative for a particular neighborhood. 503, we have similar, I'm sorry, what the 5 district maps. So I'm sorry, I left this map on. I'll explain what this map is here on this. Oh, sorry, let me go back here. What that map is in just a moment. Maps, these are the 5 districts maps that are presented for your consideration. And again, similarly, we have some maps that use Highway 101 as the divider, and some that bring the north end all the way over from the east side of 101 to Frenchman Creek, and then taking the whole upper area, as in map 502. And map 504 also takes in the area north of Frenchman Creek. So those are, if that's something to consider in a 5 district map, if that makes sense. Let's see. Similarly, the east sliver, if that's something that you want to consider, and also as we saw in the 4 district maps, some of the maps have Canada Cove connected with that sliver going up towards the center, towards Main Street.
When you say non-contiguous at Troon Way, does that mean it's impossible to connect that sliver with Kenyatta Cove?
No, the sliver is connected with it's Kenyatta Cove. Okay, I wasn't sure if it was Canada or Kenyatta. What happened in that particular map, and I regret not showing a detail because, and when we get to that map, actually Troon Way is drawn in with Kenyatta Cove, and it's not contiguous because there's another census block that completely surrounds it. That census, an ocean colony block that surrounds Troon Way. So it cannot be, it has to remain in District 4. So you can't, it's such a small area. In fact, it's right where Highway 1 is on this map. The Highway 1 marker is. When we get to that, you can see the map submitter that submitted maps 504 and 505 each drew Troon Way to be in District 4, and Troon Way, to be in District 1, but it must stay in District 4 because it's surrounded by a much larger odd-shaped area. This little insert right here, late in the afternoon, the map submitter, after I was able to do a blow up and show on our professional mapping software where Troon Way, how it was a surrounded island. So they submitted this new map, and I haven't had a time to run the numbers. It is population balanced. It's very similar to 5005B, but there are just some differences, some slight differences.
Elise, can I just make a quick comment? I think you can see it if you go back and forth. 5 districts allow you more flexibility than 4. They allow you to cut things differently and grab populations in certain ways to attract the priorities that you mentioned the last time we met, above Frenchman's Creek and then below, and that sliver. If you have only 4, it becomes far more difficult to do that. It doesn't mean you shouldn't pick 4. It just means when you're drawing maps, you have to take that into account. And Commissioner Muller, I think that's what I was getting at. When you're looking for 100 here or 100 there, it becomes easier to do when you have 5 districts to distribute as opposed to 4. And that it's up to the commission to say, we really, really emphasize this and that. And so we would rather do 4 versus 5 or 5 versus 4, whatever, because we want to try and capture these priorities. This is not easy stuff, given given the dynamics of your district. But you can see the differences if you go back and forth with the 4 and 5, that the 5 allows you more options because you have more room to move stuff around. That's all. I mean, the maps that were presented, whether they're population balanced or not, they're good. People were really trying to get at this, and they're finding out how difficult it is. So.
Thanks, Ken. It looks like we had a few hands pop up. Claudia, you were in there and then your hand disappeared. Did you have something that you wanted to say?
Just that Shalice said Highway 101 multiple times rather than
Highway 1. I'm sorry. My apologies.
That's okay. That can be confusing to the public, though.
Oh no, I've been working too
hours.
but too many other areas. I'm sorry about that. Highway 1. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Claudia. And then I think Michael was up next, and then I see Phil and Steve.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. Shalice, if you would look at alternative 501, that should be a 5 versus a 6 in the middle of the map. Is that correct?
Yes, that's a 5. Mm-hmm. You know, when we get to the detail, it'll be more clear. Mm-hmm.
Okay, because on my computer, it looks like a 6.
Okay, I'll look at that when we get to the detail. Uh-huh.
And then my question too is about Highway 1. Are we in a better defense position by using Highway 1 as a demarker, or not necessarily so?
That's one of the just identifiable borders. It doesn't necessarily mean that highways take precedent over local streets. It's just as long as they're identifiable is what the law says. I know in some jurisdiction, it's important that they don't divide the city by the freeways, and they've made a great effort to not have the freeway or highway be a divider. And so that's also something to consider. It's the community does not want to be divided or defined by the highway. And also sometimes there are businesses that have common concerns, and some businesses are on the east and some businesses are on the west side of the street. So it's not necessarily, it creates a stronger position.
Okay, and then my last question is, based on the maps that we are seeing tonight, both the 5 districts and the 4 districts, that represents how many responses did we get from the public? Are each of these representing an individual submission?
Yes, it was the exception of the Bs. So the ones that have the Bs identified, those were drawn by me.
Okay.
Based on the map. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Were any of these persons contacted when you were trying to make an alternative to the map?
No.
Okay. And is that a typical process to not make contact?
Actually, typical is we don't provide an option. We just show it as non-contiguous. And then tonight, if you like that map, we would go back and see how we can make it population balanced. I thought that it would be fair to this commission to offer an alternative because there's really not a lot of different ways to make them balanced, rather than wait till your entirely next meeting for you to see those maps.
Okay, thank you for that clarity.
Mm-hmm. I do want to point out while we're looking at this screen that maps 501, 502 were drawn by NDC. Maps 501, 502, and 503 and 503B are the only maps that don't pair incumbents. So 504 series, 505 series, and 506 pair incumbents, as does 507 is on the next screen.
So which ones again do not pair incumbents?
The first 3, 501, 502, and 503.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. When we're talking about pairing incumbents, the reason why if it's possible to draw options that don't pair incumbents is so that we give the voters the opportunity to determine who has earned re-election and who hasn't, as opposed to drawing a map that has for example, 4 people in one district, then we would be sending the message to the voters that doesn't matter if you like 4 people, you can only select 1.
Okay, I think Phil is up next. And Shalice, would you mind going to that next slide really quick?
And this is 507. It just didn't have room to fit on the other screen.
All right, thank you.
But just a quick question on the pairing, and then I wanted to come back to something you said about the south of the city. So presumably you could make a version C of some of these maps where you tweak the borders a bit to reduce the pairing of incumbents. Is that something you typically do?
If it's possible, if that's, yes, we could. If it's, sometimes that would take a complete redraw of some of the maps, but yes.
But okay, so you haven't done it yet, but it's possible. Okay.
No, I didn't redraw any of these maps with that view at all. Okay. Just to simply get them population balanced, or in case of 507 to be contiguous.
Okay. So I just wanted to point out that I think the Miramontes Point Road sliver, I had a look at it. I think there's 6 residents down there. But just to point out that looking at this page, the 504 and 505B series are interesting because not only because Kenyatta Cove has moved into a different district, but because it's the north end of the district extends far enough, I think, to contain the senior center on Main Street. And so what these maps do, I think, is put the many senior residents of Kenyatta Cove in the same district as the senior residents in South Main. And in fact, I think we had a public comment asking about exactly this, whether that particular community of interest could be protected by grouping them together. And it's just interesting that these maps seem to do that.
I agree, Phil, and I just want to add on though, are we looking at a salamander here?
No.
Okay.
It is, I mean, it's an odd shaped, it is an odd shaped district, but especially when looking at Kenyatta Cove versus Ocean Colony, very 2 different communities that are aligned with the other communities along the sliver, and then in the areas that was just pointed out east of Main Street.
Okay, and then Steve, I think you're up.
Yes, thank you. So I'm curious, on this particular screen, it appears as though the last map, which I'm not sure what its derivation is, but that's the only map that actually gives us what appears to be a population breakdown with respect to the citizen voting age population, Hispanic versus white. And so one of the numbers that sort of jumped out at me was the differential between the 16% citizen voting age population number for Hispanics within the city, and then the attempt to balance and sort of group those folks together as much as possible between 21 and 28%, which is clearly reflected here, where some of the districts appear to be, close to 10% or even less. So that would make sense that we're trying to do that. But I'm wondering about sort of, you mentioned the seniors at the senior center in Kenyatta Cove and so on. And we have a number of populations of interest. And I'm wondering at what point are we going to potentially be able to evaluate these maps based on how well or not well they do with respect to representing all of those different populations in ways that we would hope to do so, and whether the conventional wisdom is it's best to sort of distribute them or concentrate them, because I've sort of heard it both ways as to what's preferable in this particular exercise. And granted, given the population that we have in the city, we're likely to end up basically chasing our own tail, trying to accomplish all of these objectives, because we're going to end up doing something that looks like an unsolvable jigsaw puzzle. And the last thing is, I just want to mention, with respect to some of the neighborhoods, that, while some of this may look good on paper, I'm looking at kind of the doomsday scenario, for example, of map 505B, when I look in my particular neighborhood and I see that I literally have people who are a few blocks walk from my house who are in 4 different districts. And that just feels to me to be, that seems to me to be a kind of I don't know, runs counter to how this exercise is supposed to work. So that's all.
I also just wanted to clarify, is there any difference that I'm not seeing in the detail between map 504B and 505B?
Yes, there is. And the area is up by Mill and Main Street. It's just a slight major difference. I can show you when we get to the detail slides. Are you able to see my cursor?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's in this area right here.
Okay. Yeah, so maybe in the detail slides that'll show up a little bit better.
Yeah, and I as I recall from the map submitter's comment, it was an attempt to get to even to a closer population balance.
Okay.
But what happened is when we had to take Troon Way out of there, then the population balance, they did a great job. There's 84 people in Troon Way that we had to take out of 505 and 504. So it kind of messed up their population balance. But all these maps, unless they say not population balanced, are within the acceptable range. I do want to point out the numbers that are showing up on the far right one that I last minute inserted there. I just grabbed it from Dave's redistricting app. I think those are total counts, not necessarily citizen voting age population. They're not percentages. So until we can analyze which numbers were displayed there and in percentage, it would be difficult for, I'd caution against using those numbers for analysis tonight.
Thank you. And it looks like Paul is up with the question.
It was more of a follow-on comment to what Steve was saying. I do find with some of these maps that Arleta Park or Alsace-Lorraine is being divided up into 2 districts, and in some cases 3, which seems not to me to make a lot of sense. I worry about the east of Highway 1 sliver. I appreciate the intent of trying to get Kenyatta Cove linked up with the area around the senior centre where we have a senior population, but we're doing that with this tiny thread of, as you say, 6 residents. And then you've got people sort of way south of town paired up with people in the middle of town. I'm concerned about that, but whether we're really making that connection seems very weak in terms of making the district contiguous, or even though the community of interest is clear in being seniors. And then my third point is really around, in my opinion, my thinking is that we really shouldn't consider where the current council members live. Because in my mind, we're drawing maps for 10 years and the city can use for 10 years. And that shouldn't be influenced, in my opinion, by where the current council members live. We should be drawing the best maps that we can draw for the city of Half Moon Bay. And, we're appointed by the council, so I don't think that we should be influenced by where the council live. And we could be in a situation where council members live next to each other, and would we draw a line between them and put them in different districts? I don't think so. Those are my points. Thank you for listening.
Well, I wanted to point this out in the detail, but this might be better to point out why we're looking at all these together. Map 503, when Ken and I were analyzing the maps and actually trying to draw a map to accomplish the direction of the commission, last time we came up with a map similar to 503, and it was not population balanced. I know there was a desire to keep Arleta Park in one district. And so with 503B, the way to accomplish that is we had to basically shift the lower half of District 3 east so that we could give, and the reason for that is District 4 is too short. It needs to pick up population somewhere. So, and it has, because it has to be contiguous, it has to pick up that population from someplace. And so that is that was the fix, which did not end up keeping the full Arleta Park area together. But we did want to point out that we made an effort to create a map that met the goals of the commission. And actually, this was not produced by us, but this was submitted through District R that did the same thing that Ken and I were trying to do with the mapping software. So I did want to point that out. We tried to accomplish that full goal of keeping the area by, is it Oak Park? Those, that was one of the comments, the area behind Tres Amigos and Oak Park and north of it, Oak Avenue Park, I'm sorry, I think. Yeah, up to Oak Avenue, up to Oak Avenue Park, and then Frenchman's Creek being entirely in the northern area, northern district, but couldn't quite accomplish it because District 4, the bottom district, has to pick up population from somewhere. Also, before we kind of go into the detail of the maps, you'll notice the numbering is inconsistent. And the reason why we do that is because we found over the years when we changed the numbering system different from how the map submitter submitted it, they don't recognize their maps in some cases. But in the end, we will fix the mapping. So don't worry about how the districts are necessarily numbered in each of these draft maps. We can fix the numbering. Any other questions before we move on? I keep feeling badly that 507 had to go on a different page. It's a good map. And when we get to 507, I can point out how the new law doesn't allow that map to be contiguous. So I had to draw 507B. But if you're ready to just we'll quickly go through the detail of the maps. I just basically want to show that we have this here so we can jump back and forth if the commissioner wants to go to the detail of any of the maps, then we can zoom in more closely.
Sorry, Shalise, were you just to go back to 507B, so that one is balanced? Or you were able to make it, or sorry, you were able to make it contiguous?
Yes, so 507B is contiguous. I just had to pick up a block, and I think it only had very, very few people in it, just to that area where Main and Highway 92 crisscross. You can't have, we're not allowed to have, sorry, looking to see how many people it affected, if I could bring it up on the screen. I have a couple screens going here. So we're not allowed to do areas that just meet at corners. So there's only 17 people that were involved to bring in that additional blue area under Highway 92.
Cool. And that may or may not have been user error with the software. So just saying.
Okay. All right. And then, so here again, draft A that you've already seen, I'm just have it in here so that in case you want to refer back to it. I'll turn to 501 and 502. Now to the new maps that you have not seen. This is map 401. It's a 4-district map. Okay, it's hard when I'm sharing my screen. I can't look at my other notes. 401 actually has 2 pairings in it, so I wanted to point that out. So it has 2 different districts that have pairings in it. Brownstone and Rohrbach are paired, and Jimenez and I think it's Ruddock are paired. And this is one that was interesting that took the sliver, but it didn't take that final portion south of Miramontes Point.
Is it okay to jump in?
Mm-hmm.
I had a comment on map 401 and also 502 for the committee's interest. So these are the 2 maps, the 4-district map and the 5-district map. that have the maximum variance between districts in terms of Hispanic CVAP. So you remember those 28%, 24% numbers? Those are the two maps that give the highest fraction districts.
And that's an indicator that when we talk about the citizen voting age population, we also, I know it's often easy just to say the Latino citizen voting age population, but also the characteristic of the areas have similarities in when you talk about oftentimes number of children in the household, language spoken at home, similar social patterns. So those are all the considerations that are taken into account when you're talking about grouping those neighborhoods together, as we've talked about in the past. I do have a demographics page where they're all together, and also this has been on the website for you. So when we're talking about the citizen voting age population, further in our slides, we are showing that. I do have it on my screen if anyone is interested in me reading what they are for some of these particular maps. Map 402 does take Canada Cove and place it with the other areas that are, let's see, north of, I think it's the areas along Main Street between Seymour and Filbert all the way up to Miramontes Street. So I guess down below it must be Miramontes Road, I'm sorry. .403 was not population balanced, but just slightly, as I recall. So we were able to accomplish that by, and I'm going to jump to 403B. If I recall, just see if you look at Metzger Street, where districts 4 and 3 come together on the east side of Highway 1, you'll see that those 2 blocks were picked up to population balance. .403B is one of those that has splits Arleta Park into 2 different representative areas and uses Poplar Avenue as the north border for District 4, Poplar Street, I'm sorry. 404 was not population balanced. I believe the population balance is at north of Kelly Avenue between Kelly and Pine. So there's 404 and Kelly Avenue and Pine Avenue. There's a council member that lives in that area, so it did change the pairing for that particular map. So in 404, 404, Brownstone and Rohrbach are paired in a district, and in 404B, it changes that so that Penrose and Rohrbach are paired in District 2. I wanted to point that out because actually I made that population adjustment before I had identified where the council members lived. So I don't want anyone to believe that that was an intentional population adjustment. It was just the population adjustment that seemed to make sense.
So I have a quick comment on 404. So I think one aspect of this map that would not be good at all is that it pairs up Ocean Colony, the many wealthier residents of Ocean Colony, with not only Kenyatta Cove but also the South Main apartments, and I think it might have the effect of diluting the political impact of both those two communities.
And that is the type of comment that when we're looking at maybe narrowing down the maps, eliminating those that may have a similar feature could be a consideration, or those are the type of things to be looking for as we're going through these maps. 503 is not population balanced. The adjustment was made. If you look at Poplar Street, Poplar and 2nd Avenue. Oops, I'm sorry, I went the wrong direction. That's where most of the adjustment was made actually, and it had to move over to pick up. There's the area east of Main Street, just that upper area.
I think Committee Member Gator has a comment.
Yeah, thanks, Maria. It's actually more of a question. I'm trying to understand really what we're trying to achieve with this particular piece of the meeting. I guess we're looking at the details. Phil's made a couple of points on some of the maps. Are you looking for comments on all of these maps as we go through them?
No,
I have some on ones we've skipped through already.
Yeah, we found that the best approach is after we have kind of gone through and everyone's make sure that we do want to point out the features of the maps and point out these maps. It takes a lot for people to draw maps and want to make sure that each is given due consideration. In the end, we find to narrow down the maps, and it's certainly up to the commission, but typically the best approach is for each commissioner to identify their two preferred maps from each of the categories to see what overlaps we have. And then talk about the features of those preferred maps. And then the commission deciding ultimately on 2 preferred maps in each category.
Okay, thank you.
But it's good, these comments are helpful because there are observations that will be seen. So if the commission, if it's working to make a few comments, otherwise when you bring forward the map that you prefer, it's often helpful if the state a few reasons why you prefer it. We don't recommend going through each map saying why you dislike this map, dislike this map, dislike that map, but instead focus on the maps the 2 that you prefer and the reasons therefore.
And I think we'll also take some public comment after we've had the chance to see the maps, and then we'll go into deliberations over maybe saying which map we like and for what reasons.
Yeah. So Troon Way is right where the Highway 1 marker is. There's a little pink square of 84 people. It's actually surrounded by a very large census block that goes all the way around, if you can see my cursor. So it's not possible just to take this whole section and move it down. So unless you want to group, Ocean Colony with Kanata Cove, it's not possible to do so. So Troon Way is an island, so it has to go with the surrounding census block that's around it. If you haven't had a chance to look at the interactive review map, and you can get to it from the draft maps page, that's something that you can zoom in very closely, and actually you can click on the census block overlay. And it will, you can see the census block outlines. Once you zoom in, the census blocks numbers will show up and their faint outlines will show up as well.
Shalise, perhaps can you show that really quickly? Is it something you could show?
Mm-hmm.
Or have the commissioners looked at that? It's a very, very valuable tool.
Mm-hmm. And that's also a good way for us when we're talking about the maps that you like, we can go to it. It's going to take me just a second if we want to do it now, or I can get through these slides and then show it to you as you're talking about the maps. And if you'd like, I can start to speed this up now that we're kind of familiar with looking at the maps, because I don't want to take all evening just going through each of these slides when I know you all have had a chance.
I had a question about a constraint that appears, if I may, because it seems like one of the things we're learning here that will influence us later are identifying constraints. And in a map which has a pairing, if one of the paired incumbent council members was elected in the election 2 years ago, and therefore their term continues, would that basically preempt, another incumbent, from being able to run, because that district would not have an election? And in fact, if we were to somehow create a district that included both of the incumbents that were elected 2 years ago, would that be an impossibility? Because that would create a district that would have 2 representatives.
So it takes 2 full election cycles for your map to be perfected, meaning that no council member's term will be cut short. So if you have someone that was just elected in 2020, they will continue to serve until 2024. Even if they were placed in a 2022 district this time, so they were elected in 2020, they were placed in it, they were drawn into a 2022 district, they would still continue to serve until their term is up.
So a related question is, if we create, whether it's 4 districts or 5 districts, and 2 of those districts contain incumbents who were elected under the district elections of 2020, would it mean that those 2 districts would not have elections in 2022, and that therefore the other districts would?
So you'd still have the same number of districts that have 2022 elections, have 2022 elections. 2 would have 2022 elections and 2 would have 2024 elections.
Right, but the districts that contained an incumbent would be the ones that don't have an election in the next 2-year period, and the other districts would, because they don't have an incumbent in representing them at the moment.
If it's a possibility that you would have a district that didn't have a residing incumbent until the election came up in 2024.
Shalice, if I may, I have an example from Hal's first question. The maps that we adopted in 2018, Brownstone and Rarback are both in District 2. So the 2020 election was the first district election, and District 2 was up. Rarback ran for district council member, Brownstone did not, but he still is finishing out his term through 2022. So even though he was placed in a district with another council member, he's still operating off of his first, elected 4-year term. So but right now we have a district representative in District 2, and we also have an at-large council member in District 2.
So if I may ask, in 2022, if a district has been created that does not currently have an incumbent whose term continues, would that district by default be one of the districts that did have an election in 2022?
Well, it would depend on the election sequencing, which the council will decide when they adopt the final map. But we still, in 2022, we know that we are going to elect 3 council members. However that looks like, be it an at-large mayor and 2 district council members, be it 3 district council members. Most likely, what they would do is not select the 2 districts that just had an election in 2020. But it depends on what map ends up being adopted and what those maps look like. But there has to be 3 electeds on the ballot in November 2022, because we switch every 2 years. We either have 2 seats up or we have 3 seats up. But once the final map is chosen, it'll then be, okay, so which districts were already elected? Are those districts the same? And then it would be the other 3, however that looks. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. I think Steve has a question or comment.
Yes, I'd like to echo Paul's earlier comment about caution with respect to this exercise when it comes to our current makeup of our city council. I think that there is something to be said for this being sort of a, let's call it a backhanded way of enforcing term limits, that we need to draw up something which says each and every member of the 2,000 to 3,000 people in each one of these districts has as much sway as the potential one person who happens to sit on the city council at the moment. So I think that we should look at this as much as possible blind to that. That's my personal bias, because it feels as though if we throw in the wild card of paying too much attention to our current council members, we're liable to end up alienating large parts of the population or disenfranchising them, quite frankly. So I would caution us to maybe not be quite so concerned about that, despite the fact that obviously with respect to parliamentary procedure and legalities of the city and whatnot, we can't completely ignore it. But I think that's actually out of our charter, I would posit.
And Paul?
Yeah, just a couple of general points on this map. The area behind Tres Amigos. So I think this is an area which is fairly predominantly Hispanic. This splits that into 2, which is, in my mind, is dividing up a neighborhood / community of interest. And there's a couple of others, I think, where that's happened with this area that is behind Tres Amigos, the Pine Avenue Oak Park area. Yeah. And the second point I have, and again, I think there's at least one more map that has this. The district north of town has put Casa del Mar on the west side of Highway 1 into the same district as all the streets that are on the east side of Highway 1. And that's interesting, but I'm not sure that the interests and issues that are in Casa del Mar are consistent with or the same as the issues for folks who are on the east side of the highway.
Okay, so let's go through the others. 505, which is virtually the same as 505B, but without the Troon Way. .506. From what it appears to me, the attempt was to try to keep as much as Arleta Park in the same district. It does have goes further north all the way up to Highway 92 for what they're numbering is District 4. This is a clearer picture of the non-contiguous area that is corrected in 50B. Again, there's very few people in that district, in that particular area. It was fixed.
Just to clear up a question about what is Arleta Park when you think of it this way. I think of, my understanding is that, what you see in the lower left of what's labeled 4 in 507B, spruce, filbert, myrtle on the east side of the highway, and the continuation to the west across the highway, is all what was considered Arleta Park, and the highway split it when it was built through in the 50s. Whereas what's north of Central is a larger home, newer, tract of homes, which, might have different demographics economically. And Amesport Landing likewise might be kind of a different community of interest in a sense, as a condo complex. So, I'm not sure when we talk about how to keep Arleta Park together or split it, crossing the highway versus the north-south issue. It seems like one of the sticky things that we wrestle with.
Right, thanks for pointing that out. I watched the meeting, the last meeting, and you made that same statement, and thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, I think Paul has another comment or question.
Yeah, on this one, thank you. On this one, similar to the last one, you got this piece of District 2, which is the east side of the highway, the whole Stone Pine area, connecting in with completely different communities on the west side of the highway. And could you go back to 506, Shalise? Yeah, so, okay, yeah, so way up north. So full disclosure, I live in Frenchman's Creek, so I do know this area pretty well. This looks like this is dividing up Miramar into 2 districts. There's a pink piece there, which is in District 1, and then some part of it that is in District 3. For me, it makes sense to keep Miramar in one district, whichever it is.
Is that an artifact to the way the census tracts are drawn? Because I've seen some of the other areas that occurs too.
I don't remember, Hal, from when I tried to draw this map. You might be right.
It is.
There's like cores and wrappers.
Yeah. But my general point is, I think most of the other maps have Miramar all in one district, whichever that district may be.
Yeah, is there room for correction? So say we liked most aspects of one map as a committee, and then except for maybe that little north piece of Miramar, and we could figure out how to tweak that. Is there wiggle room, or do we need to adopt one of these that we have in front of us?
If there's directions to modify a map, when we're making that direction, we'll bring up the interactive review map so you could see the number of people that would impact, and it gives you an idea of the escalating effect that it could or would not have on trying to population balance.
Are you able to manipulate them, for us this evening so that we can come to a conclusion with an adjustment? I think that was the question.
If it's that's harder to do. I do have the mapping software on this laptop. It's a harder ask, but if it's just 1 or 2, wouldn't be as difficult.
Shalise, if I can jump in, sorry, I'm not on video. What the most important part is for you to crystallize the ask. If we can go to the interactive and we can get down to street levels and do that, and then Shalise and I can go back and start to funnel, hey, we like the concept of this map, except for this adjustment and this pinch and this tuck.
Okay.
You do have some time to get there. And then we can say, okay, let's get from 6 of these or 12 of these to 3 of these and really get down to what we're after here. And so I remember the Frenchman's Creek, that was a significant issue that came up last time. If you want to go to the interactive map and you can tell us which streets you're talking about or which lines, you can see that on the interactive. And then we can go back, look at that, adjust it, and then see where we'd have to population balance, if that made sense.
Yeah,
that's doable.
That's good to know, Ken. Thank you, because I do see several maps that I almost like, but each one has its own little piece that would need adjustment, and like you say, tucking it in.
One of the most frustrating things for me with working with the software and the blocks was how often an individual street would be the
Right.
dividing line where there were houses on both sides of the street,
That's right.
and you literally have people walk across the street and they'd be in a different district, which doesn't exactly echo the way neighborhoods work. And so it's a frustrating and actually quite idiotic way of designing this. And I'm not exactly certain why it's done that way, except for the fact that that they have to work with maps, and the maps don't have homes on them; they just have streets. So I think that's what we're running into with some of these things. My own house and those of many of our neighbors, and things like what you saw in Mirror, I think are a reflection of that.
And that's
Shirley,
a problem shared by,
please.
yeah, that's a problem that's shared by every city in the United States.
Yep, that's right. I was going to say almost the same thing. Commissioner Muller, the fundamental part, if you remember, the most fundamental issue is equal population. If you didn't have that, you could really move lines around. But to the extent that you have to get equal population, when you get down to these brass tacks, it becomes really, really hard to match communities and get close to the numbers, especially in small jurisdictions. So you're exactly right. It becomes block by block, and it becomes very hard to do what you're trying to do. But that's it. It's because the fundamental one person, one vote federal law says you have to get as close to that 10%, under that 10% as possible. But we can take your priorities and try and fix them and adjust them as you want.
All right, I think that we've gone through the detail of the maps. I do want to recognize those that use the software before with using the estimated data. I know some resubmitted, but they're just so far out of population balance that not possible to use those maps, but did want to acknowledge that. Pointing out here that we have the demographic summaries of each of the districts. These are the 4 district plans. I know it's small to read, but sometimes it's useful when you're getting down to deciding factors to look at some of the breakdown for the citizen voting age population. And just pointing out, I have that for the 4 and 5 district maps. I did create some map notes. These are for the 4 district plans, showed the population deviation. And we're okay with all of them except for those ones that we identified as being not populated balanced, and I did offer an option for those. That option, if you don't like the option that was selected, we can look at other ways to change, but it was, there's not a lot of room to get these population balanced. On the right-hand side, the map submitters did submit notes and in some cases. So those are supplied here for you. And the same with District 5, with the 5 district maps. And with that, that concludes just the run through of the PowerPoint. I'm going to get back to these screens that have them all as one, but I did want to jump over to the interactive review map, and it may take me just a minute. So I'm going to stop sharing. I need to bring that up on my screen, actually. I have 2 different computers, but and then I'll share it again. Let me go ahead and share screen so you can see how I'm navigating to it. That may be useful. I'm navigating through the draft maps page. So drawhmb.org. And here's where you can see all the maps as in presentation form that I just gave to you, the brief summaries, and then all the maps are listed individually below here. I'm going to this link, which is the interactive map viewer. These gives you instructions on how to navigate around. The thing that's checked is the current districts when you first open it up, as are the census blocks. And I'm pointing that out because as you zoom in closely, the census blocks will show up. So we talked about this particular, we have an odd census block configuration here. There are 116 people from this area all the way up through here. And you can see they're on these opposite sides of the street.
Commissioner Muller, I think that's your issue, right? That's the issue you're pointing out.
And from here down, it's even in a large area, 493 people in just this entire area. So if you live on this side of the street, you're grouped in with this whole entire area that's going to be virtually impossible for us to split. But we can't split it. Wanted to change the background just to show you. You can show the underline. I need to go in and change the transparency is a little dark on these colors. But you can see, let's just take off the current map so you can see. What I need to do is put the outlines for the current map. That's what I'll do. I can't do it on the fly, but I can do it after this. But you can see what we're talking about, these homes that end up being on the other side of the street are counted in that larger block section.
And you all have access to this, to see this, right? To be able to, you know it intuitively, but you can see it on the maps.
When I change the base map to gray, you can even see those census blocks even better. You see the constraints that we're having to follow some odd shaped census blocks. Back, let's get me back to the layers map, show the current districts. And the base map, I'll just change to one. So as we're talking about the maps, I'll bring up the layers. And if you want to bring up a particular map, say that you were interested in map 401, a particular area, we can obviously zoom in and you can see, I can take out that census blocks if that's annoying. You can see the street names a little bit better. And as we zoom in more closely, the street names will populate. Okay. So that concludes my presentation on the maps. And again, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and happy to bring up this interactive review map when you're discussing it. We have, as I mentioned, it does work well for each of the commissioners to initially to identify maps that they favor, and we can start the discussion from there. Or whatever the commission's preference is, you can eliminate a group of maps if you like. There's similar characteristics that you know you don't want to move forward. We can eliminate a group like that, whatever is your pleasure. And Chair, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, so I think we'll first look at the 400 batch. And I'm looking at slide 12 right now because that has all of them. If that's helpful. Does anyone want to talk about maps that we should eliminate or advocate for a certain map? I saw your hand up there for a second. Hal, do you want to jump in there?
Chair Holt, if I could, I think this would be the appropriate time to take public comment.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Let's move to public comment and then we'll come back and start our discussion. So let's open that up.
Okay, we do have 2 speakers so far. David, go ahead.
Hey guys, good evening. 2 speakers, who would have thunk it? And I have to ask you to be patient because I also am on a laptop. So I came into today pretty well prepared about what I wanted to address, and it's 2 specific items, but I stumbled across some facts earlier today that kind of blew me away. And that is that in 2020, 1 in 82,000 non-Hispanic college-educated white individuals aged 25 to 64 died of COVID. I know you're thinking, where's he going with this? Well, 1 out of every 240 indigenous people died, 1 in 390 Latinos died, and 1 in 480 Black Americans died. And those facts go to the core, the essence of what you're doing here and why it is so important. And when I say it's so important, I mean it not in the context of slicing up the pie equally and getting everything just right and keeping Arleta Park in one contiguous piece. I mean in not disenfranchising a population or a community either at risk or not in a position to defend itself. And to those ends, if you bundle Kenyatta Cove with Ocean Colony, you are looping in roughly 1,000 people who are all seniors, who are on a fixed income, whose average home price is roughly $350,000, with a population of 1,600 people whose average home price is $2+ million. Income, we're not even going to try to judge it. These are not contiguous communities in any context. And if you do that, you are disenfranchising an at-risk community that does not have the ability to defend itself. So any map that is drawn and does not link Kenyatta Cove with the lower half of Main Street and the senior center does a huge disservice to that population. And I want you to understand that. If you choose to do it, that's your choice, but that's what you're doing. If you bundle in on any of these maps that I'm looking at on the display here, if you bundle that in, you are disenfranchising that entire community. It's not about equity now, it's about disenfranchisement, if that's even a word. Second thing I want to address is the mythical mayor. I'd like to strongly encourage you to dump the entire 4-map series, and the reasons are very simple. There is no such thing as an elected mayor in a general law city in California. Yes, you can designate one person to be elected. That person has the same exact legal and statutory authority as every other council person on the city council. They have no extra powers. They have nothing. In our city, they have a written agreement in the council rules that allows them to help set the agenda and do a couple other administrative things, but there's no difference between the mayor and the other 4. But when you say to the community, hey, we're gonna elect a mayor, they get in their head, in their mind, they're electing an individual who has plenary power or has power to do things, and that's not what it is. Further, it dilutes the representation that the individual communities have. And as Ken noted earlier, it makes it nearly impossible to draw an equitable map in Half Moon Bay. It's almost impossible to do with 5 districts, although I think it can be done, but it's functionally impossible to do that with 4 districts. So my ask to you is seriously consider dumping the 4-district model entirely, flush it down the toilet, and whatever else you do, keep Kenyatta Cove linked to the southern end of Half Moon Bay, because if you don't, you're going to be disenfranchising that entire community. And that was basically it. So I hope you will keep those things in mind as you go through your process, and I will switch off here. Thank you.
Is it permissible or appropriate to ask some questions of the speaker to get further of his views, to address his concerns, or is that something we should discuss later?
That's Chair Holt's discretion.
I think, Hal, if you have a clarifying point for the speaker, I think that would be appropriate.
Right, thank you. Those are very thoughtful things, David, thank you. It struck me in keeping with a point that Phil had made earlier about the differences between residents of the downtown area versus of the south part of the city. That there are, common interests as well between Ocean Colony and Kenyatta Cove with respect to transportation, whether it's driving or public transit. They have concerns about how the highway works and how things are connected to the center of the town. But I also wondered, David, since you've done some analysis of these things, if there's a way that you've considered of splitting Ocean Colony and perhaps, the western edge of Arleta Park, such that, eastern inland, further inland versus closer to the Ocean Colony might span 2 districts, and as such, make sure that there isn't one one community that just basically says, here, we don't care what all the other communities of interest associated in our district do, because our community of interest dominates.
I don't know that I can answer all those questions, but what I can offer are these notes. The first one is the NDC has right now the final map. I might as well just come up and say up front, I was 504 or 505, whatever it was. And because of the concerns they had, I updated the map that now perfects the issues with contiguity. Is that a word? The contiguousness of the district and also the pairing. I don't see a way to carve out Ocean Colony. It is such a large entity. There is no way, because of where it is, that I was able to find to carve it out. Nor do I think it should be carved out. What I don't think it should be done is paired with, you've got 2 opposite ends of the socioeconomic spectrum there. You said public transport, for example. I can assure you, there's nobody in Ocean Colony that is using public transport. I'd bet my life on it. Kenyatta Cove, there are tons of seniors that use the bus. So I'm not saying that these 2 communities don't have some similar concerns because they're next to each other. Of course they do. But the overriding concern is someone from Ocean Colony, for example, who is elected, because that's what's going to happen, because they have basically a sole veto over this. Are they going to represent the interests of Kenyatta Cove over the interests of their supermajority that allows them to serve at will? My personal feeling, and this is something for the committee to discuss, my personal feeling is that is the one place in Half Moon Bay where you guys can actually damage a population. All the others, if you split Arleta Park up at Poplar or Kelly, well, Kelly's the other side, but Poplar or Filbert, these are subjective things that aren't going to have a lot of value. If you group Kenyatta Cove and Ocean Colony together, you have orphaned Kenyatta Cove in the opposite sense.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Bill Balson.
Hi, my name is Bill Balson. I happen to live in Ocean Colony. And first, I'd like to thank everybody's hard work on this. I went through quite a bit of effort 3 years ago when the city went through this last year, or 3 years ago. And it's relatively difficult to balance all the competing criteria. There's one criteria or set of criteria that I'd like to call to your attention again, though, just because I ran into this 3 years ago and it sort of surprised me. And that is that some of the variables that the computer system you're working with present are based on actual 2020 census data. Other variables are based on an economic survey that is not part of the official 2020 census. And the number of districts in the 5-year survey are different than the census district. So what the computer system does to resolve that is it does a population weighting, and it sort of spreads the socioeconomic variables out over the census districts that are available. And just so, for example, Ocean Colony and Kenyatta Cove happen to be in the same sampling district. So some of the variables that you might have available to you from the system, they smash together those 2 communities. And it's just worth keeping that in mind when you look at things like average rents or average income levels. The system, the way it works for a small city like Half Moon Bay, don't give you the level of resolution that you might prefer. So just be cautious when you're looking at those kind of variables in the system. And the other thing I'd like to point out is Half Moon Bay, at the end of the day, is a pretty friendly, homogeneous community, and we'll do just fine with almost any of these maps. So more power to your analysis, and thank you for your service.
Thank you, Bill. Next speaker is Jan Hansen.
Hi, this is Jan Hansen. I've lived in Kenyatta Cove since 2015, and I just wanted to make a couple factual clarifications to, I believe it was Mr. Iblovi's couple statements. First of all, people in Kenyatta Cove are not all low income or on fixed incomes. The homes are now selling for well over $500,000. I think he mentioned they're all under 350. My home, since I bought, has gone up 66% since 2015. Second, there's some people are on low income, but other people in Kenyatta Cove, there's physicians, there's attorneys, there are professors. I myself am a graduate of Stanford Law School, practiced 30 years, and chose Kenyatta Cove because I thought it would give me good bang for the buck. And I did due diligence and thought it would be a great place to live. So hopefully we're not going to stereotype it too much. I agree there's senior issues. There's transportation issues, but I think that's true for everyone in the city. And I believe there are some more senior citizens also in Ocean Colony. So I just didn't want us to get too stereotyped about that. I'm standing up a little bit for us guys here in Kenyatta Cove. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. And that concludes our public comments.
Okay, so I appreciate the members of the public. I feel like each of your comments moved me definitely into considering maps in a different way. And so I appreciate your input, and I hope other committee members, we can incorporate that in our conversation tonight. So let's start looking at the 4 series maps, I guess. And if everyone maybe wants to just chime in either with, I know we don't want to go through a list of things we don't want to see, but I did find some comments helpful. Phil, your comment earlier about what you did not want to see in a map. I feel like those comments are helpful just in getting us kind of going in the same direction. So does anyone have comments to start us off?
I would just simply say that I think Phil was persuasive in to me in not using the strip of the east side of Highway 1 to join Kenyatta Cove to the little edge of east side of downtown. So I would be less interested in map 402 as an example. And similarly, when we get to the 5s, I would say more interested in 503B as an example.
Okay, I'll jump in as well. In terms of what I would not like to see is I see Arleta Park is chopped up here in several of the maps. And 401, for example, there's an example where, as Steve was saying, he can walk from his house and be in 4 different districts. So I think I'd like to avoid that as well. So in that case, leaning more towards something that looks more like 404B. But I do want to consider what our speaker just said in terms of, but the speaker was also talking about the 5 district maps. So since we're talking about 4 district maps, I think 404B would fit most of my criteria.
Awesome.
Steve and then Claudia. I'm sorry.
So,
Yes, I have been persuaded listening to what is a very kind of well-informed set of comments here, not including my own. And I think that despite the fact that I've expressed some desire to see my own neighborhood kept whole, I don't know that the demographics of my neighborhood are as sort of demand that be done, especially from the standpoint of protected groups, citizen voting age population groups, Hispanic, and so on. Because there actually are, I know for a fact that Arleta Park is changing and the demographics are changing. I think a lot of property is being flipped and people are being forced out of the neighborhood and so on. So, and I don't know that any of that can be taken care of at the level of redistricting. So that said, I would lean towards the one of these maps that does actually, with all due respect to Phil and others, that does actually attempt to keep Kenyatta Cove separate from Ocean Colony. And the only map that does that is 402. Personally, I don't really feel as though, despite, I mean, it's always an interesting thing when I bring visitors here to point out the radical disparity of some, the diversity of this town, which is part of what makes it so great. But it is diverse, and we don't necessarily want to see it be homogeneous. So I would lean in the direction of 402 on this one. But that said, I'm a firm believer that we should go to 5 districts. So I'm not. I'll
Thank you, Steve. I think Claudia is up next.
Yeah, and I will totally agree with Steve. I am adamantly opposed to 4 districts, and I am very strongly in favor of 5 districts. But I truly believe that Kenyatta Cove and the senior center areas need to be coupled. The criteria in terms of seniors so overpowers any other consideration there. And so if I had to vote for any of the 400s or the 4 districts, I'd go for 402 for that reason. That's it.
Thank you, Claudia. Paul?
Thanks. I think one of the deliverables we have here is to provide the City Council with 2 alternatives for the 4 map and 2 for the 5 district. Is that right?
Yes.
Right. So I think and the City Council ultimately is making the decision. We're advising them. We're not making a decision here. So for that reason, I would want to give them the option of having Kenyatta Cove being linked with South and Main Street. So I would say definitely we should present 402 to them as an option. Of the others that are here, I don't like crossing over Highway 1 in the north, some of these north is so 404, which has District 1 spread on either side of Highway 1 is something I just personally don't like. So if you really had to force me, I guess I would say my second choice would be 403, but it's not a very strong preference for that option.
I have a question, Marin and Jessica. The council has asked for 2 recommendations for 4 districts and 2 for 5 districts. Are we absolutely held to that? Or can we say, you know what, of the 4 districts, only 402 meets the majority of our concerns? And likewise on 5 districts, X map takes our recommendation. I mean, do we have to hang with the 2 and 2?
Well, so ultimately what they want is 1 4-district map and 1 5-district map, but they're going to hold 2 public hearings, and their public hearing on January 19th is going to be their first review of any maps. and they'll receive public comment. They'll provide comments that will then come back to this group to finalize down into one 4-district and one 5-district map. And so for the purposes of that process, I think sending at least 2 of each model just gives them a little bit more to discuss and come up with their input that then comes back to this committee.
But to your point, Claudia, maybe we did have the option to take one of the maps and just move things around a little bit if it wasn't to our liking. So maybe we could advocate for one, and then the second would be something that we would say, well, we like this one if, and then give a list of what that would look like.
And that would work because that gives NDC plenty of time before the council hearing to then modify that map based on the committee's modifications to it.
Mm-hmm. So we can say we strongly recommend 402, and second recommendation would be whatever with the following modifications.
Well, it would be, you guys would make a decision on those modifications tonight, and then NDC would then make that map reflect those changes. And so it would be the 2 maps, but one of them would have this committee's modifications made to it. So you don't necessarily have to pick 2 of what's on this screen. You could say 402 and then 404B with this adjustment, but when 404B goes to the council, that adjustment will be made.
A process question, Jessica, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
When presuming that we give some direction and NDC produces, a tweaked map that goes to the first workshop, does this commission's members have any role in the workshops other than speaking as members of the public to continue to, weigh in or contribute?
No. So the staff report will be probably a few pages. We're going to cover the survey. We're going to cover, all of the public input received to date. We're going to cover some of the committee's discussions, and then it'll all be in the staff report. And then if any of you did want to come and speak as a member of the public, you would certainly be welcome to, but you would not participate in the public hearing in any way outside of public participation.
Thank you.
Okay, I see Claudia and then Phil.
Oh, no, I'm finished.
Okay. Phil?
Yeah, just on the staff report, that, just to be clear, that will be for the city council meeting, the public hearing.
Yes.
And can you just talk us through how will we make our final report to the council? How will that work? I mean, when will we make the decision to 2 maps down to 1 map, and what kind of report will we submit? How will we give input to it, and so on?
Well, so the 4 maps, we'll just say the 4 maps will go to the council on January 19th. They'll provide their input. We'll then, on the 22nd and the 27th, we'll share the input that came from the city council, seek additional input on those, we'll call them focus maps. And then the February 15th city council hearing, that is when you would be sending 1 4-district and 1 5-district based on the input you received from the council and those additional public workshops. And then that staff report will include everything from the January 19th plus what happened since and how the committee came to their recommendation. And you can, at that January 27th meeting, if there are specific points that you want to make sure I include in the staff report, if there's, if you all want to agree on how the message is presented, we can discuss that at that time, and I'll make sure that's included in the staff report.
Okay, interesting. So you write the report, based on our input at the January 27th meeting. Perfect, thank you.
Well, based on so I'll basically take the report for January 19th and then add to it. Following that, then on January 22nd and 27th, we held additional public workshops, summarize any public and committee input from there, and then the final recommendation from this committee, along with then the staff recommendation for the council, as they choose the map and then choose the election sequencing.
So these two staff reports, one for the January 19th meeting, the other for the February 15th meeting, will you give us a chance to review those before you send them to City Council?
Well, we don't have a meeting. I mean, I could share them with the chair and the vice chair. Basically, as like a subcommittee, but I mean, it's going to be summaries of all the discussions to date. That's why I was mentioning at the January 27th, if there are specific things that any of the committee members want to make sure are mentioned, I'll place an item on the agenda as basically like final staff report prep, and we can talk through that and figure out what all you would want included.
Okay, that sounds good to me. I mean, I understand how hard it is to, collaborate on reports like this with the Brown Act and everything. So, so that sounds good as an element of the January 27th meeting.
Yeah, we'll make sure to do that then.
Was it my turn to go back to the maps?
Yeah, go ahead, Phil.
Okay, so I think I already raised strong concern about 404, just for the way it puts both South Main and Kenyatta Cove in with Ocean Colony. So I repeat that, urge to discard that one. I think I got misunderstood earlier that when I was pointing out this eastern sliver and now it only has 6 residents in it, that was only to say that I felt like it was the wrong thing to be talking about. The right thing to be talking about, I think, was the connection of Kenyatta Cove with South Main and the senior centre there, which I think is important. And so I too am in favour of map 402 for that reason. But I did want to flag 401, I think is worthy of council consideration, just because it is the map that minimises the dilution of the Latino community's vote. One other comment about the splitting of Arleta Park. In both 401 and 402, it's split down a north-south line. I actually think that's not a bad way to draw a district boundary, because I think there is this gradient across and a difference between the residents who live closer to the ocean and residents who live closer to the highway. I suspect they're facing different issues and could maybe benefit from having different representatives as a result.
Okay, thank you. So just to tally so far, because I'm taking notes and I may not have done it right. So I have Paul liking 402 as the first choice and 403B as the second choice. I have Claudia with 402 only. I have Phil with 402 and then 401. And am I missing anything so far? And is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, I would be 402 for me. And then just a quick comment based on what Phil just said with respect to the splitting of Arleta Park. I can say from experience of the last couple of weeks with the rains, the drainage situation has been very desperate, and there have been a number of homes in our neighborhood that were really badly damaged as a result of flooding. And that's something which, happened the closer you get to the ocean because of the water flow. And we have quite a few neighbors that were really put out quite badly as a result of that. So it's just an example where that probably does make sense in terms of if you have to split a neighborhood to do it that way.
Thank you, Steve. So, Steve, do you have a second choice, or are you just sticking with 402 only?
Only 402. I guess the one thing I would say about 402 is I believe it was Hal who brought up earlier the area around Tres Amigos and some thought to be given about a splitting of a neighborhood within a particular housing apartment complex there. I'm not sure if that map is the one that does that, but that might be something that we should look at quite carefully and make sure that those boundaries are appropriate in that map. I don't know that area well enough to say that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we haven't heard from Hal and Michael yet. So does either one of you want to express your opinions on these maps?
Do you want to go ahead first, Michael?
Yeah, I'll go next. My computer has died, so I'm just on my phone now, so please bear with me. I am going with 402, and I think a lot of the reasons have already been stated, but just to have mine for the record, I too am very concerned about a community of seniors, and for that group to have some clout as far as going forth with making sure that issues are heard very clearly and that there's representation that has that voice. I think there are a lot of commonalities with anybody who's living on the coast. So there's lots of relationships and so forth, but obviously there are certain interests that if you're not a senior, you don't have those interests that are top of your priority. And I just think that that needs to be noted and respected. So I am going with 402. As it relates to my second choice, I'm going with 403B. And one of the reasons for that is because I live on the west side, and somebody's already made the point. And there's a different consideration for people that live by the ocean. It's just, at some point, you might have, oceanfront property, the way the erosion is going, and the erosion is definitely taking place. And if you walk that coastal trail, you see it every day. So I'm going with that scenario, not because I love it, but because of the fact I think it captures some of the dynamics that are going on the east side versus the west side. And while all of us are loving this community and very pleased that we're here, there are some different factors that people are facing on either side of that highway. So those are my choices.
Thank you very much. Okay, and Hal, I think it's you're up.
So first of all, I very strongly agree that it's a policy decision for the council as to the connection of Kenyatta Cove and South Main Street, and 402 gives them, that option, and we haven't really had any reason, I think, to discuss trying to modify that kind of aspect that 402 represents. So I definitely think that we should support, showing that one to the council. I would say 403B, more than some of the others, deals with, some of the issues of Arleta Park and the area behind Tres Amigos and so on. But I think that, the sensitivities that we've discussed here, if NDC can, work on tweaking things, along the lines that you and several of us have brought up, there's going to be, it seems to me, that there's going to be steps with the public workshop, with the city council, and then our two workshops, that will allow for taking in a lot more kind of fine adjustment possibilities in January. So I'm a little bit indifferent as to, exactly what the details are at this point. But I definitely, believe that, the five district map is going to be the more important of the things that we recommend to the council. None of these 4 district maps for the north part of the city cross Highway 1, which I like that they don't cross Highway 1, because I think those are big differences. And I do agree also that, closer to the ocean versus further from the ocean, it seems like a significant criteria. I wondered if you could just create, 4 or 5 strips of distance from the ocean all the way north to south, but the census blocks clearly don't support that. When David Ablovi was discussing the points that he made, I was looking at the census blocks and how it might be possible to even divide Ocean Colony eastward and westward, which is possible, but I don't think we'll do that here. So, okay, that was a lot of words. 402, and I'd say 403B as a starter.
All right, thanks, Hal. So it looks like we have a clear winner. I'm also putting myself back at the 402 as my top choice for all the reasons we've heard here and from the speakers as well. I think you all have said it eloquently already, and so I'm not going to repeat. But I think everyone is in clear agreement on 402 encapsulating something that's important and that we don't see in any of the other maps. I also hear that most of the council committee members seem to be leaning towards the 5-district model, and so maybe we can come back around to our second choice here, because we do have a few different. We have 401 and 403B both mentioned several times. Should we just choose one of those, or should we come back around to it, since most of us seem to be wanting to spend more time with the 5-district maps anyway?
I too am in support of the 5 districts. I don't know what the vote is for the whole commission, but I would like to spend time on that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I've heard everybody now say that they are leaning towards the 5-district. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yes, for me.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anyone speaking for 4 districts?
I'm not speaking for 4 districts necessarily, but I would remind us that the survey that the city did, I think I'm right in saying 70% of the respondents preferred a 4-district model, either with a 2-year mayor or a 4-year mayor, and only 30% supported a 5-district model. So we should at least consider that.
If I may, Paul, that also suggests, that also lines up with the information we were given about how many people said that they preferred simply at large. That's an indicator that they wish they could vote for, everyone could vote for people, for council, for the same people across the whole city. And I do hear a horrendous, to me, tendency to start thinking about how council members are played off against each other, and neighborhoods are played off against each other, which I really appreciate the assurance of Bill Balson, about, how nice a community we are, and that's not really something we should expect to happen. But, I think the district models literally force it to happen over time.
I'm not recalling this at-large survey or whatever that you're talking about, Hal.
Yeah, Jessica, did you describe that, some of the data that was not considered relevant originally, but you summarized when we asked if there were further comments that were not represented?
Well, the 3 options for the survey were 4 years with a 2-year elected mayor, 4 years with a 4-year elected mayor, and then 5 districts. And it was about 60 or 70% that said 4 districts with a 2-year mayor. Some of the additional comments were people who just didn't want districts altogether. And I would say that was maybe like 5 people.
Yeah. And I do think that David made a good point that in that survey, there was no explanation of what an elected mayor would do. I mean, we discussed it at this committee several times.
We did put a description.
It's pretty clear that it's the role of that elected mayor is really no different from somebody who's picked by the council. But maybe you did put the description in, but maybe if people have thought about it a bit more, they may have thought differently about 4 districts over 5. My personal preference is for 5 districts.
And Jessica, how many people responded to that survey?
I think it was about 250 or 300.
So that's less than 10% of the total population?
Yeah.
And just to add to that, I don't think it was clear which parts of the of the community we actually reached with that survey. I remember in the meeting we said that none of the responses were in Spanish, for example, and it wasn't clear, whether we were really sampling the city well. One way you might read the results is there were 3 options and the majority picked the middle one.
And I wonder if this is something that we will be getting more input on as we go to the next public meetings and public hearings with the maps. So, shall we try to choose a second map here, or should we move on to the 5 districts and look at those?
Well, I'd like to suggest that we have to give a second map. So let me just nominate 403B as a default.
Okay, so that means I have 401 for myself as a second choice, 403B for Hal, 403B for Paul. Steve and Claudia do not have a second choice, and Phil has 401, and Michael has 403B. So that's 3 for 403B and 2 for 401. Are there any more comments on that? So Phil, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, it's an old hand. Let me put it down.
Oh, okay. Oh. Steve, is that an old hand, or are you?
No, I have just a quick comment about that public survey that was done. I have to say, as a person coming into this who did not have any experience, and still I think is probably the least well versed in these topics, in this particular topic, as any of my other distinguished committee members here, this is an incredibly wonky topic. And I wouldn't expect a large number of people in the city to really have a grasp on this and therefore necessarily have a strong opinion. I think that this really delves quite deeply into the democratic process in what is obviously a very important, but an extremely technical way. And so I think that the survey results, both the scarcity of them and, as I think Michael pointed out, a very small single-digit number of respondents with respect to the city's population doesn't surprise me at all, nor does the results. And I think that, what we're finding is that we're delving very deeply, and I very much appreciate having learned what we've learned from Shalise and Ken and folks from NDC and like I said, my fellow committee members. So I'm not discouraged by that at all. As a matter of fact, I think it's really incumbent on us to do our homework, and I feel quite outgunned in that respect. As someone that hasn't been through this before, but I'm learning a lot, and I'm seeing how important this is, and understanding that the things that you might think are important might not be as important as I'm sort of reflecting in my own evolving opinions on.
It's absolutely a wonky topic, Steve. I agree. Claudia, did you want to add a second choice to your vote or make a comment on that?
Well, I mean, if you do need to have a second vote, I would go for 403B. But yeah, okay.
Okay.
Let's move on to 5 districts.
Yeah, I think that we have 4 votes in favor of 403B. If we can take that as our second choice and then move on to 5 districts now, if that's all right with everybody.
Yeah.
Okay.
With the proviso that we really don't like 403B.
Right.
We have to have a second.
Yeah, that's an important note. Okay, so looking at these, let's go ahead and talk through them. And I'm just from what happened with the previous map, I'm assuming we're sort of honing in on 504B and 505B, but I could be wrong there. So who wants to start off our discussion?
Could we just real briefly, can someone weigh in? Because those maps look so similar to me. And I'm not certain that I see, actually 504B, I do see a small difference in the southern end of District 2. as it kind of merges into the downtown area. Is that the only difference between those?
Yes.
I really strongly dislike the 504 putting Casa del Mar with areas east of the highway.
Could you explain that, Hal?
I think, you know, the differences of living on the east side of the highway or the west side of the highway north of 92, you know, in terms of entry to the highway and such are vast.
But isn't that block of homes that we're looking there on the, like we're talking about the upper left-hand blue side of District 5 on map 504B, isn't that block completely surrounded by creek and wetland areas? And so those houses would kind of naturally be the only other houses in that area that would possibly have interests with people across the highway?
Yeah, I think the difference between making left turns and right turns onto and across the highway are you know, the biggest political issues in the town as far as you know, being able to travel by car. You know, I've lived on both sides of the highway, and I've lived north and south, you know, of 92 in my almost 30 years here in town, and that's always seemed to me to be the largest issue, other than, you know, the issues of you know, the politics of development that divided the town, you know, severely over many of the years that I've been here.
Would you say that single issue would necessitate two different council members in two different districts?
Well, as you know, I'm horrified at the idea that our town becomes a battle amongst 5 communities forever. Anyway, but yeah, I think that you know, the question of putting a traffic light on Highway 1, you know, is something probably viewed very differently from, you know, the east or the west of Highway 1. But you know, again, you know, these things are going to be workshopped in January. And the council will, you know, ultimately make the big policy decisions. So, you know, it's you know, we should offer 2 different kinds of options, you know, in keeping with what's been said here, so that, you know, we're not basically constraining the decisions that other people should be making. So I maybe we should have one that crosses the highway and one that doesn't.
So, for example, Hal, looking at the objectionable block on the west side of the highway, if we were to try to take from that population on the north side instead, so to move the blue into the north side of the east side of, sorry, the northeast side of the highway, would be an amendment perhaps that you would agree to?
Well, I mean, are we then talking about 503B?
504B, I think.
Right, but I'm just saying,
I see what you're saying, yeah.
Don't we become like 503B then?
But that 503B doesn't have the aspect that everybody liked in the previous map, which is the southern portion.
Right, so to the south, maybe, you know, we're liking things like 505B, so.
Right, so we're liking basically a combination of 505B and the south side of 505B and the north side of 503B, for example.
Can I ask that we recognize Paul, because Paul lives in Frenchman's Creek and knows that area probably better than any.
Sorry, I was getting caught up in map looking. Paul, Steve, and then Claudia in that order. Go ahead.
Thanks. When I first looked at 504B and 505B, I just thought no, because it's got Frenchman's Creek in one district. On the east side of the highway is in District 5, and then Casa del Mar on the west side of the highway is in a different district. And so something like 503B makes much more sense to keep the east side of the highway together. But one of these has the Canada Clove link to south of town, doesn't it? Yes, thank you. So yeah, so I think I quite like the idea of giving as Hal said, give the council the choice. Do you like something like 504B, with the way it's drawn out, or a hybrid of that with 503B? But then somehow also incorporating Kenyatta Cove linking to Main Street. So we're giving them that option as well. Sorry, I'm thinking aloud as I'm talking. I think maybe 504B covers both of those possibilities. And then a second choice for me, I think, would be 503B. Sorry for rambling, it's getting late.
Yeah.
I'm doing the same. I'm with you, Paul. But yeah, so you're saying a 504B and then 503B, and then
504B has those two things. It has the connection of Kenyatta Cove to the south of town, and it has this idea of somehow crossing the highway with District 5, which I personally don't like, but it's giving the council that option.
Yeah, thank you.
And we can certainly do a hybrid of the lower half of 504B and the upper half of 503B.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just ask if what we're really trying to accomplish here is to provide thoughtful input to the January period in which the public and the council will be weighing in. We're not really constraining any decisions here, it seems to me.
Okay, so let's stick with the queue, because I'm sorry I missed it for a minute there. So we have Claudia, Steve, and then Michael.
Whether we, given 504B, whether that one group in the block that's on the west side of the highway, whether they have a problem turning onto the highway doesn't make any difference to how they are grouped in terms of their voting power. So, that seems to me not to be a constraint at all. And I would highly recommend 504B or 505B, and both of them have that same issue, but everybody who lives on the west side of the highway has a problem getting onto the highway. It's not just that group, and it has nothing to do with the congruity of the housing on both sides of the highway. So my vote is for 504B, number 1, and 505B, number 2, both of which keep the senior housing and seniors together.
All right, thank you, Claudia.
Yeah.
Steve, I think you're up next.
Yes, thank you. So one of the things in looking at 503B is that it's the prettiest map because it has things sort of blocked up, and it looks like if you were, a general or an admiral, you would like that map because everything is balanced and it looks pretty, except when you get down to brass tacks, it may or may not actually represent the political and economic and social realities of our town. And I think one of the maybe the one thing that we've looked at as being kind of, I think we're all looking at as being, the hill we want to die on, is that even though the town, our town didn't really have a great master plan as to how everything was going to be laid out. And I think 505B is an accurate reflection of the chaos that has existed in this town for so many decades. And that we've ended up with, this scattershot representation of different socioeconomic groups and high and low income housing and transitional and rentals versus ownership and so on. And I think the 504 and 505B maps do a reasonable job of that. And I'm not so concerned about the sort of the Casa del Mar area. Paul, I think it's kind of amusing actually that Frenchman's Creek ends up in the same voting block. Actually, I have to look at this more. None of these maps have I been able to find my own house in these. I think I'm actually. Oh no, I'm still in the. My house ends up in the Ocean Colony group. I was going to say I was grouped with people in Frenchman's Creek, but I don't know that the needs of an individual, myself or any other individual, whether it's a council member or any other random person, trumps the needs of these kind of identified groups of people that do have realities, and it's not so much geographic as it is cultural and economic and so on. So I'm going to weigh in also with 504B and 505B for the reasons I think many of us have been talking about all along.
Sorry, I stepped away for just a second. I think Michael is up next.
Chair Holt, we do have a public hand raised from one of the map drafters. I don't know if you want to take more public comment.
Sure, I think we're open to comment.
Okay. David, go ahead.
Thanks, Jessica. I'm on speaker now. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I just wanted to shed some light on 504, 504B, 505, 505B, 506, which is the one my kids did. They're behind me watching this now. They're very disgruntled with you because you're not considering their map. So maybe I can throw in a cheer for them. And the last map on the lower right. So what happened was 504 and 504B and 505 and 505B are all basically the same map. If you look at them carefully, you'll see you can't even see the difference because it's so, whoops. There you go, because it's so small. And the difference was basically I made one slight change to even things out. There were two other changes that were added to those four maps. The first change was to remove Troon Way from down in the southern corner because it's in a place that it can't be connected, thank you, to the Kenyatta Cove Southern Main Street nexus. So the map on the lower right is the final iteration of those four maps. It has that fixed. It also removes the conflict between Deborah Penrose and Harvey Rarback in there. And it has a 0.57% distribution, and it's pretty. And that's all. I just wanted to clarify that for all of you, so because I didn't mean for there to end up being 5 maps up there, but the one you should really be looking at is the one in the lower right, even though that's the hardest one to see. And that's all I wanted to say.
Do you have a glow?
Can I get some clarity? This is Michael. I was talking and my mute button was on.
Yeah, Michael, I think we might have missed your comments. If you wouldn't mind repeating those.
Yes, thank you so much. It was my fault. I had my mute button on. I just wanted to get some clarity from the staff as relates to the part of 504B, 503B, 505B, where that section that was on the west side, is that, I can't see on my phone the details on that. That is not the Kehoe neighborhood, right? Is my question clear?
Yeah, I think it is the Kehoe neighborhood.
Well, I got a problem with that because I wrote and I've met with my neighbors, and we really we feel as if we are not being considered as a neighborhood. And to break that neighborhood up, that's a problem. So I really like the idea of keeping the aspects of 504. But to break up that neighborhood, I mean, when you don't have that neighborhood, what do you have left? So based on that, unless something could be changed, I will have my vote go for something I really don't particularly like, but to have the neighborhood broken up like that, it would be 503B.
So Michael, can you clarify just for me on that 504B, and you're objecting to the blue section on the left-hand side, or are you objecting to?
Yeah, yes, let me see if I can explain. You know, when this process started, I met with the neighborhood and, getting people's input and so forth. In fact, I wrote a long, detailed outline of what is considered the Kehoe neighborhood. We literally have on the west side, we have the ocean, and then we have public lands on either side, and then there's a highway. So it's a really, really distinct neighborhood. Right now, we don't have any power, so that's another distinction we've got. But it's a very distinct neighborhood. And when people sent their surveys in, they mentioned that. I wrote up the detailed description of that to make sure that as things were beginning to be unfolded, those things were under consideration.
So can I just clarify, what would be the reason why you would not want to be grouped in a district with people on the other side of the highway and the neighborhoods on the other side of the highway versus where we're looking at?
That's why I wanted to get clarity. On my phone, I cannot see the streets that are included in that part on the west side. If you kept us as a group, that's fine. But my understanding is you're splitting the neighborhood up.
Michael, I think it's the entirety of Kehoe.
Okay, if Kehoe is kept together, I'm fine with that. But if Kehoe is being separated, I got a problem.
No, I think in those maps, it's the entirety. And then I also just want to mention too, let's not forget 507 as well. It's on the second page. But in the blue section, I believe is the entirety of Kehoe.
Jessica, if I just, sorry, can I just jump in 1 second on that? Because I'm looking at the very detailed map on the web and have zoomed in to the full level of detail of that. And like I mentioned before, there is a weird situation with the census block. It is the area bounded by Wave, Kehoe, and Pilarcitos Avenue with Highway 1 at the east. But it does look like there's a group of houses on the south side of Kehoe Avenue, which are not included. But that looks like that's more of a function of the census blocks. And it doesn't look like there's a way of including that without including, a huge additional area. So I would say that you are probably 90% or so of the houses in there. But it does look like it is missing some on the south side of Kehoe.
Does it would be the 504B.
Yeah, just a clarity. I cannot see it on my phone, but does that mean that the houses on Pilarcitos are not included in the neighborhood?
We're double checking.
So there's houses on the west side of Pilarcitos that also are not included.
That is accurate. All the houses on the exterior are not included, and that's a function of the way the federal census drew that block. Let me just get my bearings here and bring that up on the screen for you. So if we see that these little dots are houses on the other side of Kehoe, Pilarcitos, that would not be included.
It's what Steve was saying, that we have the bulk of the neighborhood, but just because of the census drawing, we can't capture the other side of the street.
Correct.
So therefore only 501 and 503B satisfy keeping them together?
I think 507 does as well, if we look at 507.
And again, we can take directive to try to do a hybrid that gets the districts 1 and 4 of 504B or 505B and tries to accomplish the upper portions of 503B.
Shalise, would you mind going to 507 just really quick? Okay, thank you. Okay, Phil has been waiting. Go ahead, Phil.
And so I like this idea of putting forward 505 or the final iteration of that whole map drawing process as one of the options. I wanted to flag up that coming into this meeting, I thought 502 was going to be my other choice, just because, again, it minimizes the dilution of the representation of the Latino community. The 504, 505 series aren't as good in that respect as 502. However, I think if we're going to be, I think the approach of asking for modifications to 505B to solve the various problems that are being flagged, I think is a good one. And so for my second choice, I think what I would do is ask for an adjusted map that kept this Cañada Cove South Main connection that we all seem agreed on that we like. Used Highway 1 as more of a border in the north. Didn't split Oak Avenue Park. Paul flagged this earlier on in the meeting. I think it's important. If that neighborhood behind Safeway can be kept together, I think that would be helpful. And you've heard me say this before tonight, but I think if Arleta Park is going to be split, I think it's better to do it between a west part and an east part rather than a north part and a south part. And so that would be on my shopping list, as well as doing a better job at reducing the dilution of the Latino community's vote.
Okay, thanks, Phil. So just to recap, you're suggesting that we have an adjusted map to the 5 series where we don't split. Did you call it Oak Park? I
think it's called Oak Avenue Park.
Oak Avenue Park, yeah, I wasn't sure. And then we're kind of rectifying the issues between, seems like we have a majority that likes the south end of maps 504B and 505B because of this previous reasons. But then we also want to rectify some of the issues on the north end having to do with the location of the Kehoe neighborhood, perhaps, and balancing that out.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that it won't be possible to solve all problems, but I think this meeting has been pretty good for highlighting some of the concerns that we do agree on. But anyway, that was my keeping Oak Avenue Park together, splitting Arleta Park east-west, and trying to do better at the increasing the variance in the Hispanic CVAC fraction between the districts.
Yeah, good. I agree. Okay, it's Steve. I think you're up, and then Michael, your hand popped up and then down, so I'm not sure if you're in there. But
yes, I'm sorry. I was trying to make sure it was down, but you've captured my thoughts.
Okay, thank you, Steve.
Yes, thank you. So 2 things. One is that the previous member of the public who talked about this orphan map that doesn't have a number that's in the lower right corner. I'm just wondering where we can get to that and look at that, because that that looks like it may capture some of the stuff that we're talking about, but maybe not. And then the other issue that in looking at this and listening to the comments, and especially Michael's comments about that Kehoe neighborhood, is I'm just wondering whether, we could almost look at a hybrid between the top half of 503B and the bottom half of 505B, for example. Mm-hmm. And that may be an oversimplification, but, if we could look at something that doesn't, that sort of keeps the east and west of Highway 1 feeling of that one, but preserves Cañada Cove, and we can just murder Arleta Park. I'll just pass on my regrets and hang my head in shame around my neighborhood, but we can do what we need to do there.
Thanks, Steve, and I agree. I'm also letting it go with Arleta Park for the reasons I've been saying tonight, and I think the east-west split makes sense as well. So it sounds like we're all leaning towards. We haven't heard from Hal yet, so I'm gonna save you your space. But it sounds like so far we're all leaning towards some sort of a hybrid between the north end of 503B and the south end of 505, 504B. It seems like that seems to be our consensus right now. Hal, do you want to get in there?
I actually think that everybody is captured, and that you've captured, my feelings, and I also am confident that there are going to be some discussions, because I think we've identified kind of on a policy level, three kinds of issues that may come up in the public hearings and public workshops of the north aspects, the Arleta Park aspects, and the connecting South Main and Kenyatta Cove aspects. Okay. And maybe in the report, Jessica could bring across that we think these are like sort of the major policy kind of things that might determine whether there's more adjustments to make to the map in the January iterations.
Great, thank you, Hal. I see Michael again, and then Paul's hand is up as well.
I am so sorry. My hand should have been down.
Yeah, it's okay. No worries. Paul?
Yeah, I was disagreeing a little bit with what your summary there. We're trying to maybe let perfect get in the way of good, and for the purposes of the next workshop, maybe we have the 504 or 505. If we can correct that problem that we've got with Kehoe and the Casa del Mar area, that's one option, and then 503B is a different option. Rather than trying to create the perfect map out of all the different thoughts that we've come up with in the last half an hour or so. Yeah. And then the workshop then has two choices rather than one that's trying to do everything. And maybe the outcome of the workshop is we do everything, but I don't feel we're quite there yet.
Thank you for that correction. I agree with you that what we are really talking about is 504. Can we just call it 504 for the purpose of, because 504 and 504 are essentially the same. So let's just say 504 with some corrections, amendments to the northern side, and then 503B as a second option. Is that what you're
because 503B is completely different because we have that split on either side of the highway north of town.
Right. What do other committee members think of that idea? So 504 with amendments as the first option, and 503B as the second option.
It works for me. Works for me.
Okay. Could we include? Could we again include the qualifier that Claudia suggested, which is that we somehow communicate that we feel quite strongly and are in agreement about the connection of Kenyatta Cove and South Main, and so 503B is the alternative to the one that we've been focused on most. Is that fair?
So a strong preference for 504B with corrections, not being put forward equally with 503B, but as choice number one.
I think so. I mean, the others should disagree if I've caught the mood wrong, but I think that's what we're saying.
And exactly what corrections are you talking about to 504B?
Just making sure that the Kehoe neighborhood is in a location or in a district that is acceptable to residents there.
So basically pulling it back over the highway.
Possibly so.
So that it would be then part of District 5?
Correct.
I understood it to be different, actually, that the way the census block is drawn, we have people on the outside edges of that Casa del Mar area that are not considered to be part of the blue district. They're considered part of the pink. And so that's what we need to try and fix.
Yeah, and to fix that, it's such a large census block all around there.
Yeah.
It would have to be taken over.
Yeah, because there's no other houses over there.
Absolutely. It's all public land. It's those people's houses and it's public land, and then there's the ocean.
Yep.
Yeah, I played with that block a lot when I was drawing the maps, and there's no way to. It's all or nothing there.
It has to go to 5.
Yeah.
If you want to capture those houses keep the houses on the outside with the houses on the inside.
Yeah.
I think it does. Yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
So just to recapture things, it seems like we've decided that we, for the 400 series of maps, we are unanimous in putting forward map 402 with a second choice of map 403B. For the 500 series, we are putting forward map 504B with corrections to the northern side, moving the Kehoe neighborhood back over into District 2 possibly, with 503B, as our second option. Does that sound correct to everyone?
Yes.
Okay. Any objections?
And Chair, I'm wondering if I could have also leeway if it is possible to accomplish not splitting the Oak Avenue Park area and to look towards the northwest divider for the Arleta. If it makes sense.
East-west divider.
Yeah, east-west. It runs north-south. Correct?
Yes.
Yes. Then I would, if I could also, if I'll play around with it, see if there's even another alternative to present.
Okay. That sounds great.
And I'll go ahead and produce this map that's in the lower right-hand corner, so that it looks as the others do.
Okay, thank you.
So typically what we do is we all the maps will remain up. The 4 maps identified will be moved to the top and identified as focus maps, so that the public was able to hone in on those maps. And but yet all the maps will still be on the table.
Okay. That sounds good. Does anyone, are we good with that decision until our next meeting, which will be on January 19th? At that point, we'll have the post-map hearing. It'll be the first public hearing to discuss and revise those draft maps and discuss election sequence.
Chair Holt, to clarify, the January 19th meeting is a city council meeting. The committee's next meeting will be January 22nd, which I believe.
Oh, sorry, so that's the workshop.
The Saturday one, yeah.
Okay. And just is that January 22nd, 27th meeting going to be an in-person meting by any chance, or is that still online?
No, they presumably, I would imagine at the January 19th meeting is when the council would have a discussion on AB 361, but it's not going to be before then, and then it would be for an additional 30 days. So no, both of those meetings would be on Zoom.
Okay. Is there any way to get those maps perhaps printed and hung up in some public location like the library or somewhere where people can just see them? Because when we're talking about something like maps, I feel like we're hiding behind a screen here, and we're part of the limited public input is because of that. And if the maps were out somewhere, then I feel like more people would be involved in the process and feel like they had input along the way.
We can do that.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Can I make one more request, which is that along with that, in some way other than drilling down deeply into the software, which I know that one can do, is there a way that we could get the detailed demographic information on the maps that we have selected and nominated? Because one of the things I'd like to do, and I think some of the members have done that work, it's a little confusing as to how one can actually produce, these things that show the detailed demographics, the communities of interest, and the citizen voting age, population numbers, and so on.
Absolutely. We'll get the full demographic summaries.
Great, thank you. Okay,
Thanks.
we have 2 more comments, and then I think we'll be done here. So Phil, and then Hal.
Yeah, so I think this evening's discussion's been really interesting. There was a few points where we really came up against the census blocks as being an issue for map drawing in Half Moon Bay. So my question for Shalise is, can the Census Bureau be petitioned to split these big blocks up in order to make map drawing easier in the future?
Well, yes, but not for another 10 years will it make a difference. So
that's fine. That's
right.
Fine.
Yeah, and unfortunately what happened is they moved towards making bigger census blocks. Another problem that happened is the state of California was asked to submit their existing precinct lines, and the state passed on it. So the census blocks don't even follow existing precinct jurisdiction lines, which is a big problem. So there is an opportunity for the city to weigh in on some things like the underlying maps, and at that time they can weigh in on census blocks as well. I'm not sure how much of a pull or how much of a influence that would have, but.
Okay. I mean, these islands surrounded by big areas, really make life difficult, don't they? Okay, thanks.
They do. Okay, Hal?
I just wanted to join you in my concern that the public participates much less in these remote meetings, and that a Saturday in-person workshop in a very spacious area, be it Adcock Center, the big community rooms of the library, or IDS Hall, or other public large space here on the coast side, is something that goes on for a lot of non-governmental type things and school things and such. And I would hope that, we could, have, something where people actually can see and get a sense of the large maps hung on the wall and the ability to walk up to them and discuss the details. It's very difficult. I really have trouble imagining members of the public, very many of them, being able to touch, in Zoom and, point to little things. So
yeah, maps are definitely a tactile process. Okay, Phil, did you have another comment?
We could, that day or the Saturday after, we could also table at the farmer's market again and have the maps printed out on easels.
That sounds
the
like
farmer's
a great
market
idea.
ends. The farmer's market won't be going on at that point.
Yeah. Okay.
I think this is last week.
No, there went that idea.
I like the library, or Ted Adcock, like you said, something public like that where people can.
Yeah, we can figure out some more tabling during.
There's got to be food. As long as there's food, people will come, right? Donuts. Okay. Phil, did you have your hand up again, or did I miss that? Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone for your time tonight. This was a longer meeting for sure, but it was an important one. I think we got some good work done here and made some decisions. So thank you for all your hard work tonight. And thank you to city staff and translators and to NDC staff as well for presenting all this information, compiling it. I know there's been a lot of work behind the scenes, so I appreciate everyone's hard work. And the committee members, have a good evening.
Thank you. Happy
Thank you very
holidays.
much. Yeah. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you all.